Good evening, and welcome to tonight's election forum. Those of you who are here in the building, those of you who might be watching on YouTube, glad to have you here. My name is Troy Gibson. I'm a political science professor at the University of Southern Mississippi and the moderator of tonight's event. By way of introductory remarks, the Founding Fathers all believed that a virtuous citizenry was a necessary precondition for the survival of our republic, but they also believed that an informed citizenry was necessary as well. John Adams, our first vice president and second president, put it like this: liberty cannot be preserved without general knowledge among the people. Events like this make our experiment in self-government both meaningful and successful. If government rests upon the consent of the governed, as we're told, then it is crucial that the people be informed about and conversant with the ideas and practices of government. So we should applaud these gentlemen for their willingness to dialogue before us and with us about the key issues facing our state and nation. The Democratic candidate before us tonight is Mr. Taylor Brinkley, a practicing attorney from Hattiesburg. Our Republican candidate is Mr. Rick McCluskey, a financial advisor from Hattiesburg. Not with us tonight, unable to be with us tonight, is Mr. Toby Barker, the incumbent Republican member of the Mississippi House of Representatives from District 102, and that's the position these men are pursuing. Mr. Barker was elected to that position in 2007, but will not continue if these gentlemen have anything to say about it. The Republican primary will be held this coming Tuesday, August 4th. So, gentlemen, welcome. Let me explain the rules for tonight's discussion. The rules for tonight's debate are as follows. Each side gets a 5-minute opening statement. We have already decided who will go first. That will be Mr. McCluskey. Questions will come under 4 general topics: candidate background, education, health care, and the economy of the state. Each candidate will alternate who answers first, and answer time will be limited to either 2 or 3 minutes. With the exception of the background question, rebuttal time will be allowed as well, usually about 30 seconds for rebuttal time. So, without any further ado, we ready to begin?
Absolutely.
All right. The first thing we'll start with is introductory remarks.
All right. My name is Rick McCluskey. I'm the Republican challenger against Toby Barker, District 102. And a little bit about myself: I'm a Marine War veteran, served in Iraq in 2003, 2004. Served in what they call the Sunni Triangle of Death, received a combat meritorious promotion while in country. Coming back home, I went to Southern Miss, studied political science and history, then I became a financial advisor. The reason I'm running has a lot to do. I see failed leadership right now in the state and specifically in this district. I want to see more engagement by not just the voters to the politicians, but the politicians to the voters. We need a transfer of powers. Right now, it seems like a lot of politicians are beholden to their friends or in Jackson and not to the voters of their district. When I went into the Marine Corps, I took an oath of office, an oath to the Constitution, and that was a lifetime oath. And when I came back, I continued to want to serve. And that was one of the things that motivated me to get into this race. But more importantly, it was the love that I have for this city, for this district, for my family and friends, and just want to implement some type of change, some positive change. I'm not one of the people that want to get up there and just say, hey, let's not do this. I want to offer fresh, new ideas, conservative ideas that's been lacking in District 102. I'll tell you, the things I learned in the Marine Corps was how to take a team of people and work toward a goal, sometimes against insurmountable odds. But the most important thing I learned how to do was fight. And sometimes that's hard, because you have to fight against things that the powers to be in the system that is working against you. And we all know that politics right now is in disarray. We have people that they treat it as a team sport, and that's all they want to do. There's really no goals or objectives. It's more about winning the next election. And I can tell you that my goal is to actually make change. And people that know me know that I'll always be honest with you, even when that hurts. And I think that's very important. I want to thank Taylor for coming here tonight and engaging you guys. Unfortunately, the other opponent refused to come. And I can tell you, he always talks about being bold. Taylor showed that he was bold by coming tonight. It's easy to say you're bold, but then you have to put action to it, because then any other time it's just empty words. And he had a perfect opportunity to be here tonight and talk to you, and he didn't. And I hate that. It's disheartening, but hopefully after August 4th, you'll see Taylor and I having more conversations. So thank you.
All right, Mr. Brinkley, you have 5 minutes.
Absolutely. My name's Taylor Brinkley. I'm the Democratic candidate in the race for House District 102. I don't have a primary opponent, so I'll be in the race through November, so we can continue this conversation after tonight no matter what happens on August 4th, and I would appreciate the opportunity to do that as well. I'd like to first of all thank Rick for inviting me and the incumbent to this forum. It's unfortunate that the incumbent couldn't be here, but we know he's busy, so that's okay. I just want to start off by telling you a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in District 102, Hattiesburg and the surrounding area. I graduated from Petal High School in 2002. After that, I went to, well, actually I had a kind of a strange university trip. Went to 3 different universities in 3.5 years, but ultimately ended up at Ole Miss for law school, where I met my wife. And after law school, I worked in Jackson at a defense firm for a couple of years, and was lucky enough to have her marry me, and we moved down here to Hattiesburg, and I started my career at my father's law firm, which is Brinkley Law Firm now. What I do day in and day out is I help injured workers try to get back on their feet and get back to work. But ultimately, getting back to why I'm running for office, I just want to say when me and my wife first discussed it, I have to admit I was skeptical about the whole process. For the last 4 years, I've seen politicians pretend to legislate and grandstand on issues that they never had any intention of following through with. And so ultimately, I looked at my 2 kids and I thought, if I'm going to build a better life for my kids, we've got to build a better Mississippi for everybody. And at the end of the day, me and my wife decided that we would make the time to make this happen. So I'm really happy that y'all showed up today, and I look forward to answering these questions that are coming at us here in just a minute. And again, I just want to point out that at the end of the day, I think there are 2 major issues that Mississippi has to address right now to move us forward, and that's going to be education and that's going to be health care. First and foremost, education is what we build our foundation on for future industry, for future jobs, and for our children's future moving forward. Our economy is not going to get any better until we have more educated people in the workforce. We can pass all the business-friendly laws our legislators, like to talk about, but until we have a people-friendly state, people aren't going to come here and bring their jobs with them. As far as healthcare goes, we probably need healthcare expansion more than anybody, and District 102 is one of the hubs for healthcare in our entire state. So, with our hospital, losing money every day because of uncompensated healthcare costs, and our citizenry suffering because they can't afford insurance, we've got to change that. We've got to add jobs to our economy through healthcare expansion, and we've got to help people live a healthier life so that our state can move forward in a positive way. Ultimately, we'll get to these issues, I'm sure, here in just a minute, so I'm going to yield to the moderator, and I appreciate y'all coming out. Thank y'all.
All right, well, we'll start off with a couple of questions. There won't be any rebuttal on this. This is just going to give the candidates a chance to introduce their basic political philosophy. Some background questions. We'll start with Mr. McCluskey. He'll have 2 minutes, and here's the question. How would you describe your basic political philosophy? Is there a person, a thinker, or a political leader that has been a major influence on your life and thought? If so, who and how?
Well, I'll say the people that really influenced me as our founders. I look at them, and it was just such an amazing document that they came up with. One that was revolutionary, way ahead of its time. And the truly amazing thing to me is the average age of these men. They were 35 years old. and the risks that they had to take and the things that they had to endure, not just against a foreign adversary who at the time was the strongest in the world, but against each other and against their countrymen. And they came together and they were able to draft this document that protected the individual, which we had never seen. It took away from a centralized authority. It gave the power to everyone, and it gave rights to people that was not granted by a government, but granted by the Creator. And to me, that's inherently conservative. And when I say I'm a conservative, that's my political ideology, I want to define that. That means the conservative application of government in my life. I'm very hesitant of any centralized authority. And if Taylor or myself are fortunate enough to win this election and go to Jackson, that does not mean we're the smartest men in Mississippi. It does not even mean we're the smartest men in District 102. I have two jobs if I get elected. Number one, always protect the Constitution. Number two, in matters that are not a question of the Constitution, represent my people, because that's how this system was created. But I look also at the founders and how they were selfless, especially George Washington, where they wanted to make him a king, and he refused that. He didn't even want to be president. And I think that's what we need out of our elected officials. I do not want to be a politician. I want to be a statesman.
Mr. Brinkley?
Yes, sir. I guess I would have to start off by saying that my basic political philosophy is one of common sense. I think more common sense belongs in our political system, and at this point in time, I'm not seeing a whole lot of it in Jackson. Ultimately, I think our politicians owe it to the voters to put public service over self-service, and that's another thing we're missing in Jackson. Every time I read a story in the newspaper, it's, campaign finance being misappropriated for personal gain, backroom deals that undermine the success of our state. But ultimately, I think that if we had more common sense in Jackson, then we'd actually get a lot more done rather than all this ideological fighting that they do. I also think that politicians should be able to give somebody a straight answer and should not have to equivocate every time you ask them a question. And ultimately, once they give that straight answer, they should be able to follow through on their campaign promises. As far as the person that's influenced me the most in my life, I have to say my father, Alex Brinkley, is the #1 influence in my life. I was talking to a voter just the other day who asked me why I would be any different than the legislators and leaders that came before me, the ones who said they were going to fund education and then decided better of it, I suppose, or so they say. Ultimately, it's because that man told me that never make a promise you're not going to keep or you can't keep. And I have to work with him every day. I have to look him in the eyes when I go to the office, and I don't want to disappoint him, and I don't want to disappoint you. So when I tell you I'm going to fully fund education, and I tell you I promise to do that, you can rest assured that I intend to do that. Ultimately, I think integrity and follow-through is what we're missing, and that's what I intend to bring to Jackson if I'm lucky enough to be elected.
Didn't realize it would do that. All right, second background question. We'll start with Mr. Taylor on this one. Both of you actually have voiced an opinion that the state is in desperate need of change. You're concerned about the status quo. What in particular about you that makes you think that you would bring something unique to the table as an agent of change?
Well, I think as a lawyer, I represent regular people day in and day out, and I see how these laws affect their lives. I see injured workers coming in, and I see them in financial distress, and I see the shortfallings of the laws that our legislators have put on the books. Ultimately, I think there's a lot of small changes that could be made, common sense solutions that could make big change, but instead our legislators continue to want to overhaul complete systems in ways that at the end of the day ultimately gets nothing done. Just this last just this last legislative session, our leaders, instead of addressing any of these common sense changes and making some real progress in our state, decided they were going to spend a third of their legislative session pretending to legislate. They talked about tax cuts. They didn't explain how we were going to handle those tax cuts. They didn't have any debates on it. They manufactured political talking points for an entire month. All the while they could have been addressing common sense solutions and making small changes that could have big effects in our state. Ultimately, I think that over the last 4 years, I've seen a unified government with the same party in control of each house of government. And for 4 years, I've seen them fail to accomplish anything significant. And I think that what I would bring would be a sense of action and a sense of common sense, to repeat myself there, I guess, to Jackson. And that's what I want to bring to Jackson. So that's it.
All right, Mr. McCluskey.
When addressing the status quo, it goes back to being bold. And my number one job, if I go to Jackson, is to shock the system. That's what we need, someone that's going to shock the system, someone that's going to do things a little bit differently. And I can tell you that challenging an 8-year incumbent was not easy. I can tell you a lot of things that I've done has been the road less traveled, and I'm okay with that. But you look at politicians that have done that throughout the nation. When it comes re-election time, the people surround them, and they get re-elected. But yet here in District 102, that's all we want to keep doing is just trying to get elected, instead of really instituting change. I'm talking about change within the system. Right now, we see good legislation go to committees in Jackson to die. Closed committee meetings. Gutted legislation, solid legislation, whether it be a Common Core bill, whether it be the Second Amendment, a constitutional carry bill, tax policy. You'll have politicians that get in front of the people and they say, well, I want to do this. But you don't know that they were in the committee meeting saying something totally different. Now, it goes back to what I said earlier. When you're in Jackson behind closed doors, the other representatives and senators, that's your coworkers. And behind those closed doors, you make deals with them. There's got to be something that we can do to transfer that power back to the people. One thing I want to look at is calling those closed meetings to roll call votes. Let's make it public. I want to know what my elected official is doing. I want to know why he's gutting a good bill. And if he's not, I want to know who I can blame for it. That's the only way we're going to see change in the state of Mississippi. If we don't do things like that, we'll keep getting the status quo that we've always gotten, and we'll continue to look at solutions and find problems.
All right, well, now we're going to move into the meat of the debate or the discussion. We're going to turn to the topic of education, and I'm going to read a couple of things about to sort of set the context for the question. On this topic, Mr. Taylor is going to go first. They'll each have 2 minutes, and they'll have 30 seconds for rebuttal following each other's remarks. So, gentlemen, some argue that Common Core is a federal encroachment upon Mississippi public education, that it's unhelpful, burdensome, and should be basically just ignored. Others think it will put Mississippi on a better footing so that Mississippi children are educated to compete with their peers throughout the country. Are you for implementing it? If so, why? If not, what is the better alternative? Mr. Taylor?
Just to say real quickly, I am for implementing Common Core. I think it goes by another name nowadays, but at the end of the day, I think Common Core is good for Mississippi, and I think it's our current leadership that said we should have it in the first place. Now we're 3 or 4 years in. My sister's a public educator on the coast, and I was speaking to her about Common Core, and I asked her, what's your take on this? And she said that she was for it. She said that they put a lot of time into it. They put a lot of time training these teachers. They haven't had all the funds they need to implement these standards, but ultimately, she also mentioned that the military has a lot to gain for this, because when she was talking to the educators and experts about Common Core, they basically said by setting up a standard for our state and every other state in the country, our military men and women, when they go to different base camps, like Camp Shelby, for instance, they don't have to worry about their families falling behind in education. They don't have to worry about their kids getting a subpar education in Mississippi. So when they leave Mississippi, they don't have to worry about their child being behind when they get to a different state, at their next assignment. Ultimately, I think these standards are about competitiveness and accountability in our schools, and I think we haven't even given it a chance. Our leadership has underfunded our schools since the day they implemented these standards, and I think before we sell out the standards and scrap a system we put millions of dollars into, we ought to see it through and see if we can do it right before we get rid of it. So just to reiterate, I guess I am for Common Core.
All right, Mr. McCluskey, your thoughts on Common Core?
No. Next question. No. Common Core, look, just a few years ago, what was it called? No Child Left Behind. And then it was Race to the Top. When are we going to stop? Since 1968, the federal government has tripled funding in education, yet graduation rates have went down. The federal government is not the solution for us in Mississippi and our educational system. Common Core is nothing but a cookie cutter curriculum that was stuffed down our throats by special interest groups outside of the state. Now, the curriculum was so good and it wasn't forced upon us, why wouldn't they just show it to us and let us make our own decision? If it was that great, we would probably adopt it. But what Common Core does, it assumes that kids in New York City learn just like kids here in Mississippi, and that simply isn't the case. A standardized test in New York City had a question that referred to a white picket fence. This was in inner city New York, a white picket fence. Children there had no idea what it was referring to. We need to figure out an alternative, a community-based reform, a plan that puts students and parents and teachers first. Give them the power. Do not strip a teacher's autonomy away. Do not make a student sit at the kitchen table and cry because they can't understand it. And I've had the conversation with these parents, and they do not like it. Now, the caveat to that is we can't just say no. We have to come together and figure out something on the state and local level that's an alternative. I don't mind looking at a curriculum. That's okay. If it makes sense and we can come together and agree that it makes sense, then let's adopt it. But let's not take something that's, once again, shoved down our throats by a federal government that's already been proven to be inefficient in every other way.
All right, Mr. Brinkley, you'll have 30 seconds to respond.
Just real quickly, I would like to point out that this was not shoved down our throats by the federal government. Common Core was a set of benchmarks that was created by a group of educators and educational experts throughout the country. Our government, our local state leaders said we should do this. We put a lot of money into it, our tax money, and before we see any results, because they are afraid they'll be found out to have undermined the system by not funding our schools, they want to scrap the whole thing and start over. They don't have any ideas, and I just think we should at least follow through and see how it's going before we give up.
Mr. McCluskey, your reply?
Well, we have a disagreement with that. I am the only candidate in this race that doesn't like Common Core. I know that Toby and Taylor both agree that we need to look at it and see how it works, but we don't have that type of time. We're still dead last in education, and we need to start looking from within to find real change. And like I said, No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top is pretty much proof that these type of programs do not work.
All right, on to the next question. This question in education will deal with funding matters. Mr. McCluskey will go first. Same rule situation, 2 minutes and 30-second rebuttals. Here's the question. It is always easy for elected officials to say they want to spend more on education. Compared to other states, Mississippi spends a relatively large share of its budget on education already. Yet we lag behind other states in per pupil spending and testing performance. Is Initiative 42 the answer, fully funding K-12 public education? What would passing it mean for the other programs, particularly the already declining share of state funding for colleges and universities?
if we really want to talk about the problems that exist in education in the state of Mississippi right now, we have to talk about the bureaucracy. Politicians use the term fully funding. My opponent says, we fully funded education. Can anybody tell me what fully funded really means? And I know they have a number that they'll give you right now if you ask that question. But the bottom line is 148 school districts for 82 counties in this state, with every school district with a superintendent of education, a staff, an operating expense, benefits, and a pay package that they have to pay for. That's taxpayers' money. And we want to talk about where the money's going. We have an IHL director making right at $400,000 a year when you account his benefits and everything else. We have a state superintendent of education, $400,000 a year. Yet we rank dead last. If we cannot address the bureaucracy and where the money's already going, then everything we're doing from then on out is futile. We do not have a funding problem for Mississippi right now. We have an appropriation problem. And the massive bloated bureaucracy is robbing our students and our teachers from being effective. And we can talk all we want to about, once again, fully funding. No one knows what that is right now. And we continue to throw money at education to give politicians a chance to beat their chest and say, I love students and I love education. Until they can address this issue, it's nothing more than political talk.
Mr. Brinkley.
Just to answer your question on Initiative 42, is it the answer? Not if you elect me. I would be the answer if you elect me. If you elect others like me, we will fully fund the MAEP, and we will make sure that K through 12 gets the funding it needs to be successful. Ultimately, this law has been in place since 1997, and our legislators have continuously said they're going to fund it, they're going to fund it. But ultimately, they always use the caveat, I think it was said, if the money is there. Well, the money's there. We have plenty of money to spend on it, on our children. It's not about the money. It's about priorities. It's about misappropriations, to use a term from Rick's answer there. Ultimately, I think as a parent, my children's education is number one, and I would hate to think that other parents are having to really stress out about the fact that their kids are not getting adequate teachers, adequate books, adequate supplies, because our legislators think that other priorities are more important. I think when it comes down to our children, that's how you build the foundation for a better workforce in our state. That's how you grow our economy. That's how you put more teachers in the classrooms. That's how you help our entire state move forward. You got to have a foundation based on education. We need a culture of education, and we're not getting it when we have a bunch of leaders who refuse to put money behind it. All they do is sit there and say, we're going to put money behind it, and then they come up with an excuse after an excuse. But I've yet to hear one single legislator come up with a way to bring in new revenue. Or on another topic, they say they don't have the money to fund it, but they're willing to throw away 30% of our revenue. So either they don't have the money or they just don't want to spend it on our public schools. And I can assure you that if I'm elected, I will spend it on our public schools and our children's future. Thank you.
Mr. McCluskey, you have 30 seconds to reply.
It seems to me that the other side of the debate, they continuously try to find a way that we can just spend money. And I'm not concerned with that. I'm trying to find a way to make our students have a better education. And I equate it to running a good business. If I'm running a business and we keep increasing funding into a certain program year after year, so getting a result of dead last in the country, then instead of pumping more money into the program, I would like to address where the money's going first. After that, we can truly understand the necessary funds, necessary appropriations that we need. But until we do that, this whole conversation makes no sense.
Mr. Brinkley.
Yes, if you don't mind. Forbes magazine recently came out last year and said we were the worst place to do business in the entire country. And it wasn't because we have higher taxes or unfriendly laws for businesses. It's because we have subpar schools and we have subpar hospitals. So until we come up with a people-friendly solution, people-friendly policies, we're not going to be a business-friendly state.
All right, we're going to now move on to the topic of health care. This is going to be a little more involved, so each candidate's going to get an extra minute to speak on the matter. I'm going to read the question, and Mr. McCluskey will go first. He'll have 3 minutes, followed by a 1-minute rebuttal from Mr. Brinkley. Let me read to you a quote from a recent newspaper article. Mississippi is the poorest, sickest state in the country, a state that stood to gain as much as or more than any other by cooperating with the federal government. Instead, Governor Phil Bryant made it clear Mississippi would not participate, leaving 138,000 low-income residents, the majority of whom are black, with no insurance options at all. Close quote. Gentlemen, having 18% of the state uninsured is costly as well, as they continue to use medical services without paying. Yet many fear that Medicaid expansion will ultimately cost the state more money in the long run as an unfunded mandate when federal subsidies run out. What do you think we should do about this problem?
First off, am I first on this one?
Yes, you
Okay.
are.
First off, I think expanding government programs, instead of doing that, we should probably be working to phase them out. We've seen government programs such as Social Security, Medicare struggle mightily. There are alternatives, yet for some reason we refuse to seek them. I work with business owners every day as a financial advisor. I work with them to find private sector solutions to problems. And this is what we need to do. We need to work with the insurance companies and figure out a way to make this system work. In Florida right now, Americans for Prosperity is running a program called Medicare Cure. And they've done it just on a small scale to about 8 counties. And they're seeing the quality of care, the freedom of the patient to choose physicians is went up tremendously. But also, you're seeing what would equate on the statewide level a $900 million savings to the taxpayer. Yet we haven't reached out to them. And I know they've been to Mississippi and spoken to our legislators and our senators, and yet we haven't listened to them. It's proven that they have something that we may need to look at instead of expanding a program to this state that we know is going to cripple us in a few years. We want to fully fund education. That's what we were just talking about. And right now, the federal government's picking up the tab on Medicaid. Guess what happens when they expand it? We're going to have to make a decision. Fully fund education, expand Medicaid, or raise taxes to the point where it suffocates businesses. This is a no-brainer. We've seen government programs like this fail miserably, and it will cripple this state. And once again, we refuse to look at the alternatives when they're out there. It's already been created. Why are we not sending people to go talk to these guys in Florida? That they're proven that they can get results for less money and improve the quality of care for the patients. I'll tell you as the next legislator, if I'm elected, I'll work together with the business owners and find private sector solutions to these problems. The backroom deals that are going on in the federal government that's trying to push, once again, another program that has, I would say, good intentions, but the track record that they have will have horrible results. I would do my best to prevent that and protect the people of Mississippi from that.
Mr. Brinkley.
I guess in contrast, I would have to say I think we should expand Medicaid as soon as possible so we don't miss out on these benefits that we've missed out on over the last few years by not doing it. Our leaders have used Washington, D.C. partisan politics to pit us against a program that would help our state and our district more than anything else. In our 2 counties, Lamar and Forest, we lost $107 million just in 2015 because we didn't expand Medicaid. Over the next, I guess it'd be next 6 years, we'll lose a total of $734 million. This money could be used to pay for nurses, pay for new doctors, pay for new equipment at our hospitals. Forest General is losing money by the day in uncompensated health care costs, 50% of which does not get reimbursed because we haven't expanded Medicaid. The federal government has increased the option for expanding Medicaid, and they will split the bill for it for the next couple of years. It's just too good of a deal to pass by. If it, the money itself could create jobs in our district. It would create, on average, I think around 450 jobs a year between now and 2020 by expanding Medicaid. And ultimately, the health care of our citizenry will increase because they'll have preventative care, which will lower the cost of health treatment overall. Our hospitals will have more paying clients and patients. But ultimately, our leaders decided they weren't going to do it because they told you we couldn't afford it. Now, education and healthcare, let's just say that's one of the top 2 priorities in my household. And I pay a lot for healthcare, and it's because it's important to me. Now, it should be important to our state to keep our citizenry in good health, because that's how we save money in the long run. We gotta work on getting our priorities together. And we got to work on getting leaders who actually care about everybody in Mississippi and not just a few people who stand to gain by their decisions. Ultimately, the good news is we still have a chance to benefit from the program, and if we do it, this January coming up. So I hope y'all will consider electing leaders who won't be turning billions of dollars away in funding from the federal government that can only do one thing, and that's help our state.
You'll each have 1 minute of rebuttal. Mr. Klusky.
The one thing I will say, I commend Taylor for addressing that issue and taking it on full front. My Republican opponent did not. He said that he wanted to launch a task force to explore the idea. That's what you call passing the buck before political season. I'll tell you, once again, I'm against the expansion of Medicaid. We talk about we need to do it because right now the federal government's footing the bill. That sounds great. It's a noble gesture. It's free right now, so to speak, in most people's eyes of the big government persuasion. I'll tell you, in just a couple of years, it will no longer be free. And then what do? We're going to be stuck with the bill. What it's going to do to Force General? Right now, estimations are saying the first year, tens of millions of dollars lost. And they have no idea what they would do. Now, once again, it may sound great, but where's the money going to come from? Nobody can answer that.
Mr. Brinkley, 1 minute.
Well, I can't address the last statistics that I just got there from Rick because I haven't seen those numbers. But it's my understanding that the federal government will continue to foot the bill for a vast majority of Medicaid expansion and will put much more money into the program than our state will ever have to put into it. You don't turn away $800 million a year in federal funds just because you might have to put up $80 million in that same year. That's the set-off is just not, it doesn't equal a good idea to turn that kind of money down. And at the end of the day, I just want to point out that you may not have wanted Obamacare or the ACA, whatever you want to call it, but ultimately, whether you wanted it then, whether you want it now, it's here to stay. Now we can either take advantage of it or we can be the last person sitting at a table where every other state has reaped the benefits and used our tax dollars to build their hospitals and pay their doctors and pay their nurses.
All right, we're moving now to our last general topic, which will be the economy of our state. Mr. Taylor will go first. He has 2 minutes and then 30-second rebuttals. I'll read the question. Mississippi has the 15th lowest property tax rate in the nation. They have the 49th, however, lowest vehicle tax rate and the 21st lowest income tax rate and 47th lowest sales tax rate. That puts Mississippi about 23rd of the best states to live as a taxpayer. Do you think taxes overall are too high, too low, or about right? If you want to see changes made, where and how? Mr. Taylor.
Well, I think we can all agree that taxes are always going to be too high. Nobody wants to pay taxes, but that's just something we have to come together on because it's necessary to pay for the basic functions of government. Ultimately, in Mississippi, it's not about income taxes being too high. It's about the right taxes being too low, or the right taxes being too high and the wrong taxes being too low. We've got a lot of corporate subsidies out there, and unfortunately, the corporations aren't giving us back what we paid for. You know, we let them come and exploit our workers and exploit our citizens, and they don't give us the kind of jobs that they told us they were going to give us. And they don't pay their fair share of taxes. So what happens? The property taxes funnel down to us. What we need to figure out is not how to just simply get rid of taxes. We've got to figure out a way to cut waste in our government. We've got to figure out a way to quit, for instance, spending 3 years implementing an education system and then scrapping it to start all over after we spent millions and millions of tax dollars. We've got to figure out a better way to do this. And we've got to do it before we waste the money. Ultimately, you know, our legislators have complained about not having enough money and come up with excuses as to why they won't fund the basic functions of government, education, healthcare, things like that. Wow, just this last legislative session, like I said before, they tried to scrap 30% of our revenue. And for what? They didn't even look into it before they did it. Despite the fact that our current incumbent says he's data-driven, he didn't rely on any data before he made that decision. He just said, we're going to do it because it was a good political move. It made good political sense to talk about taxes and get rid of them. But it doesn't make sense. We need our taxes, and we can't tax our way. We can't tax our way to prosperity, and we can't cut our taxes and find that same prosperity either. We've got to figure out a way to cut waste and to prioritize our spending in an efficient manner in the government level.
Mr. McCluskey.
You know, taxes are a funny thing. The highest year of government revenue that was brought in, the federal government, was during the tax cuts in 2004. Massachusetts, when Mitt Romney was president, increased taxes exponentially on the wealthy there, or whatever he deemed as wealthy. Government revenue went down the following year. Look at California right now, they're begging businesses to come back. We know that taxing more is not the answer. Now, the programs that we've been discussing that my primary opponent, Mr. Barker, and also Taylor agree on a lot of, if we're not getting the revenue to provide for those programs, then it's just a dream. And we can look time and time again, when you cut taxes, you take the burdens off business owners, you allow them to free up capital to invest, and they invest in themselves and they expand their businesses. It creates jobs. That is what we need more than anything. I know we talked about statistics about this is one of the best states for a taxpayer. Well, not when that taxpayer doesn't have a job. And how many people in this state actually pay the taxes? I want to get more pay in the taxes, not higher taxes. I want to put more people to work. That's how you're going to create the government revenue. That's also how you're going to create the personal wealth. That's what my goal is. I want to give the money back to the people. Taxes, in my opinion, you pretty much ask me about any tax and I'll say, yes, let's cut it, let's decrease it, or even do away with it.
30 seconds.
I agree with Rick in the sense that instead of raising taxes, we need to raise the number of jobs we've got in our state. There's two good ways to do that. Fully funding education, hiring new teachers in our district, and expanding Medicaid and hiring new nurses and giving these college grads from Jones County Junior College and doctors from William Carey a place to go work here in Mississippi, as opposed to having to go to Louisiana or Alabama or Tennessee to find a job. Another thing I want to point out is that our leaders haven't even looked into a different way of raising revenue that has nothing to do with taxes. I'd be for a lottery, a state lottery. I know a lot of people I've talked to have no objections to a state lottery. If we use the money to pay for education, then we won't have to worry about funding education anymore. I figure as much as we spend on Louisiana state lottery tickets, we probably put more money into their education system than our leaders put into our own. So I think it's about finding new ways to get revenue and about increasing jobs. And that's how we move forward.
Mr. McCluskey, your reply?
I think that the most important thing is looking at the government spending that's happening right now that's going to buddies and corporations of our politicians. they're propping them up only to fail later. You look across the state at the failed businesses that have been propped up by our politicians. Mississippi right now is currently #1 in corruption. That's worse than Baton Rouge, that's worse than Chicago, that's even worse than DC. And we have to address that. Along with that, innovative tax policies that puts money back into the taxpayers' pockets and back to the business owners. That's the only way we can fix this issue.
All right, final question. Actually, you've touched on it already, but I'll ask you more specifically about job creation. Mississippi is currently ranked near the bottom on Economic Confidence Index. Nearly 19% of its population is currently underemployed. Only 36% of our employers report that they are willing to hire. That's the last in the South. What would you do specifically about our stagnant job creating numbers? Mr. McCluskey's first.
And it goes back to innovative tax solutions. That's how you create jobs. The North American Economic Council just came out with a study that said we were 48th in economic freedom. 48th. Now we look at states that are getting it right. Texas, Tennessee, Louisiana, Florida. Right now in Texas, they transitioned to a flat tax, or consumption tax, I'm sorry. We see the average income in Texas at $56,000 a year. Mississippi, $34,000. We see unemployment in Texas has went down 7% a year since 2009. In Mississippi, it's went up 7% since 2009. We see the states that are getting it right. We can take a page out of their book. I would love to see a transition to more of a consumption tax. And I'm also open to a flat tax. Currently what we have is not working. And the only way we create jobs is freeing up investment, capital. Yes, some companies are not coming here because of our tax policies. And they still may not flock here in the beginning if we do transition. But what we could do is for Mississippi business owners and entrepreneurs to create jobs. And I would be more willing to do that. And it will happen immediately if we get away from the high tax policies, the high regulations, and high fees that we currently have. The state income tax, in my opinion, it's non-constitutional. I think it's theft, taking somebody's money at force. I want to give the money back to the people. And that's the only way we'll reach prosperity in the state of Mississippi.
Mr. Brinkley, you have 2 minutes.
All right, I would say specifically, I hate to keep beating this drum, but I would fund education. I think educated workforce is the only way to get more people hired in this state. Businesses don't come here not because of high taxes, not because they just don't like Mississippi people. We got plenty of nice people. But the thing is, we don't have an educated workforce. We don't have good schools. They don't want to send their people here when we don't have a good education system set up. We haven't trained our workers. We need to fully fund education to do that. We've got to start at the bottom. We've got to start building a foundation that we've been ignoring and that's been falling apart for several years now. You know, it's not going to be easy, but we've got to dedicate ourselves to it. Otherwise, we're going to keep falling off the bottom rung. You know, there's 50 states in the country and we're 51st in education. That's a problem because we're behind Washington, D.C. for the first time in history. So we've got to do that first. Secondly, our biggest employer right now in Hattiesburg in District 102 is our hospital and our healthcare providers. We expand Medicaid, they start hiring again. You know, for District 102, we can bring in a lot of jobs. For the state, we could bring in even more over the next 6 years. We're talking 22,000 jobs or so over the next next 6 years or so. You know, at the end of the day, we don't need to keep racing to the bottom on taxes because all we're doing is killing our general fund. We can't pay for our agencies, and there's a better way to go about it. We need to come up with more people-friendly laws, and that's the only way we're going to get businesses to come here. If we're friendly to the people they send here, and that's what we've got to do. We've got to educate our people, and we've got to support our hospitals, and that's how you create jobs, and that's how you bring business to the district.
30 seconds, Mr. McCluskey.
It's clear we just need fresh thinking. We can't continue the current trajectory of a managed decline that we're on. My Republican opponent had one of the worst, or actually the worst BIPEC rating, which is the Business and Industry Voter entity. They actually grade our representatives and senators, he was the worst Republican in the House. 2007, 54 on a scale from 0 to 100. That's pitiful. And we wonder what's going on with our state and our city. Hattiesburg was founded by pioneering entrepreneurs who faced new trails because of the opportunities that was provided them by our natural resources, like that throughout the state. And I think that once again, we can achieve prosperity, but we cannot do it without changing the leadership that's been in Jackson for the last 8 years in District 102.
Mr. Brinkley?
I agree. We can't do it without changing the leadership that's been in Jackson from District 102, but I wouldn't do it the way Rick's talking about. Generally speaking, I just think we've got to rebuild the foundation that our state is based on and that our district's based on. We can't keep ignoring crumbling foundation in our state, because how are you going to build a second floor on a house if it's going to tip over once you get done? And that's what we're trying to do right now. We're trying to build a second floor on a house, but the foundation's crumbling beneath it. And I think we need to focus on our education. We need to take what's right in front of us, use a common sense approach to Medicaid expansion, and just do it. And quit coming up with excuses not to help our people. And that's the way I see Mississippi going forward.
All right, that concludes the question portion of our discussion. Now each candidate will get 3 minutes to have a closing remark, and then I'll close this out. So Mr. McCluskey went first. Mr. Taylor will go first in the conclusion.
I feel like I'm talking a lot now, but I'm glad y'all all came out tonight. I want to thank the JCs for having us, and I want to thank Rick for inviting me. I know, as you can tell, we don't agree on much, but we agree that we should at least be able to talk about it in front of you guys. So I'm hoping that between now and November, I get to continue this conversation with you guys, and y'all will keep an open mind. I know I'll keep an open mind if y'all have any ideas that I'm missing, because I want to hear from the voters. I want to hear from the people, because when you ignore your constituents, you're not doing them any good. And when you get to Jackson, you're making backroom deals, and you're just running a popularity contest, you're not doing anything good for the district, you're just doing it for yourself. So at the end of the day, I really do appreciate y'all coming out, and again, thanks Rick for having this forum and inviting me to it.
All right, once again, I'd like to thank Taylor for coming out. I reached out to both candidates. Unfortunately, he was the only one that decided to stand up and come. I'll say this. When I decided to run, I looked at our current representation and I realized it's not congruent with the beliefs of the people of this area. When I look at a Republican incumbent who's voted to expand abortion out to 20 weeks, when I look at a Republican incumbent that gutted a good constitutional carry bill, who voted against a tax-exempt holiday for guns and ammo, who voted for Common Core, who's time and time again voted against the business interest. When I look at that, that's what made me decide to run. We need someone to stop saying they're going to be bold and be bold. Go to Jackson and implement good policy, but also you're going to have to stand up many times and stand up in the face of sometimes your friends, and I'm okay with that. But time and time again, District 102 had a representative that stood down. And I think that if we were to really look at his voting record, that it would change a lot of people's minds. Once again, the Marine Corps taught me how to be bold. They taught me how to fight, and I want to continue to do that. And sometimes you'll realize it's not as hard as what you think it is. But I know one thing, that District 102, the people of Hattiesburg, you and your families, our students, our parents, our businesses, they deserve it. It's time to stop thinking about what can I do to win the next election and to really start implementing change. That's my main goal when I get up there, and I promise you, I will be a representative that you can be proud of. One that will stand up on the issues and stand between you and the government. Once again, I want to thank Dr. Gibson for coming here and taking part in this, and you guys for coming, engaging the system. I think that's the biggest thing we need right now in this country, is for people to engage the system. And once again, thank Taylor for coming. I know he said we don't agree on everything. There's very few things we do agree on. We did agree on the time for tonight, finally. But I will say I do respect Taylor a lot. I've got to know him over the last several months. Great guy. And I wish that the other opponent would give us the kind of time that he did today. And most importantly, I'd love your support on August 4th. If you need anything from me, you can go to my website, go to my Facebook page, or even talk to me afterwards. I will call you. You can call me at any time. I have no problem talking to the constituents. Matter of fact, I love it. It's my favorite thing to do. So once again, thank you guys.
All right, that concludes our debate for this evening. The candidates have told me they're going to be around afterwards for questions that you can ask them personally. I'm also told that this will be placed on the web on YouTube, so you can contact the candidates if you'd like to get a copy of that or to find the link to that broadcast. That's it for tonight. Hope you've enjoyed it. Don't forget to vote on August 4th in the Republican primary and the general election this coming fall. Good evening. Okay.